Everyone says that we are who we are because of the wounds that life gives us, yet those scars don't necessarily reveal everything. A deeper fight, an encounter with demons that few ever fully comprehend, is at the heart of every mythology. But did you hear about Charles Bronson's situation? The unstoppable Charles Bronson was more than simply a screen bad man. For a long time, the truth behind one contentious myth that has followed Bronson around has remained a mystery. At least up till this point. As we reveal the reality behind this urban legend, be sure to stay tuned. It is essential to grasp Charles Bronson's formative years before delving into these disclosures. Charles overcame significant obstacles in his early years, which shaped his trajectory in life. An amazing and motivating story of a man who persevered. Charlie Bronson rose from the coal mining country of Pennsylvania to the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. As the 15th child of Edward and Marie Bronson, Bronson came into this world on November 3, 1921, in Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania, a coal mining town. The ancestors were Lithuanian Roman Catholics. Living in a shed with cold water near the coal car lines was anything but a charmed life for the Bukinski family. With 7 children, each of whom took turns sleeping in a cramped room, it was physically hard work. Barry Walensky was born in the mining district of Pennsylvania to Lithuanian immigrants, while Bronson's father, Walter Bukinski, was a Lipka Tatar from southern Lithuania. The early years of Bronson were a mashup of Russian and Lithuanian culture because English was not spoken at home. During World War II, his fellow servicemen even began to suspect he was an alien due to his unusual dialect. In 1933, tragedy struck the family when Bronson's father died of cancer. So that young Charles could support his family, he had to leave school and work in the coal mines. The coal mines were just as brutal for Bronson, who earned $1 a ton of coal and became tougher and tougher every day from braving new dangers like cave-ins and other mining deaths. His family's financial situations deteriorated precipitously during the Great Depression. Because his mother couldn't afford milk, Bronson frequently went hungry, and his younger sister was given steaming tea instead. Regardless, despite encountering several challenges, Bronson continued. He enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces during World War II in 1943, becoming the first in his family to finish high school. Bronson, who was reported as missing in action for 14 years, was awarded a Purple Heart for his 25 sorties against Japan, during which he bombed and strafed the Japanese mainland as the top turret gunner on a Boeing B-29 Superfortress. The biography of Charles Bronson, who would later become a mechanical monster of cool in Hollywood, begins with this dismal time in his life when he is a young man learning the cost of standing up for what he believes in. Beneath his chiseled exterior lay a guy who knew what it was like to be poor, to suffer, and to fight for survival. A life that is vastly different from the glossy one that the public typically associates with celebrities. Charles did not look for a permanent job once the war ended. Plus, he pretended to work for the company. He followed in the footsteps of 3 New Yorkers: a bricklayer, a quick-service chef, and a picker of tiny onions. He eventually settled in Atlantic City, where he established a business renting out beach chairs and umbrellas close to the boardwalk. Some Philadelphia actors he met there were amazed by his painting skills and wanted him to do their backdrops. Furthermore, they hired him for acting roles and gave him the go light to play those roles. Charles found that acting was his true passion, surpassing even his love for art. His 1949 transfer to California was accompanied by his enrollment in the Pasadena Playhouse acting program. He wed Harriet Tendler, an aspiring actress who was 18 years old when he was 27 years old. Little parts as tough guys, builders, and grizzled warriors started trickling in shortly after. But unlike the dashing Cary Grant, Charles wasn't your prototypical leading guy. His voice was so unusual, he said in jest that he should have been cast as a quarryman instead of a leading man. Known primarily as Charles Binsky throughout his early years in Hollywood, Charles received little acclaim. However, after appearing in the 1954 film, he formally changed his name to Charles Bronson. Charles felt it was prudent to remove his Russian-sounding surname as part of the era's dread of communism spearheaded by Senator Joseph McCarthy. This led to the name change. Charles Bronson wasn't always the star of blockbuster movies, even though he became famous for them. In 1958, he directed Machine Gun Kelly, a low-budget film that was shot in a mere 8 days. Famous French actor Alain Delon saw Charles in this film and asked him to France to star in another film, Adieu l'ami. The film became an international smash, propelling Bronson to even greater stardom. Flight Lieutenant Danny "Tunnel King" Valinsky, portrayed by Charles Bronson, was a master at creating tunnels to escape prisoner of war camps in the 1963 film, The Great Escape. For Bronson, the role was quite personal because he shared Danny's battle with claustrophobia. His dread of confined quarters was greatly influenced by his childhood experiences working in coal mines and his military service during World War II, which added a personal and meaningful dimension to his performance. How did Charles Bronson's performance as the terrified Tunnel King in The Great Escape leave an indelible impression on you? Since Charles Bronson suffers from claustrophobia, it should come as no surprise that filming the tunnel scenes for The Great Escape was difficult for him. However, I remember him continuing, which I understood as a demonstration of his obsession. But Bronson has an affair with Jill Ireland, who is married to David McCallum, while filming the movie. In one incident, Bronson mocked McCallum for thinking he had married his wife while he was contemplating of marrying Ireland. His marriage to Ireland made the statement a fact. Meanwhile, Bronson was involved in an unsuccessful marriage to Harriet Tendler, which ended in a divorce in 1965. By the time he wed Ireland in 1968, Bronson had already achieved fame. He gave it his all in every role he played, despite the fact that his films had mediocre screenplays. Everyone loved Bronson, but he really took off in France, Italy, and Japan. They went so far as to call him Il Brutto, which translates to the ugly one in Italy. It was a moniker that Ireland was fine with. Something about Bronson stood out to her. Something about his mix of fragility and strength drew her to him. Even off-screen, Bronson was a formidable presence. Even when he wasn't acting, he was known for being rough. His craggy features looked to be telling tales of brutality and hardship. He was often in hot water when he was younger, including making threats and, in the course of a brawl, fracturing the arm of a sergeant. A director was gasping for air after an altercation with him over a scene. It should come as no surprise that Charles Bronson was the name chosen by Britain's most infamous jail hardman, Michael Gordon Peterson, in 1987 when he sought a new identity. That was a really significant name. There was a time when Bronson threatened to kill anyone who threatened his family, according to an article in Esquire magazine, in which a commotion ensued. Not even the legendary Johnny Carson felt he could resist inquiring more with Bronson. Because that's what I said was Bronson's straightforward response. There was room for improvement in Bronson's demeanor toward the media. Their inquiries were excessively intrusive, in his opinion. Critics of films didn't have his affection because, in his opinion, they didn't even shell out money to watch the films they reviewed. Renowned critic Roger Ebert interviewed Bronson once and said that the intensity of his gaze suggested a violent streak. As soon as someone irritated Bronson, he wasted no time getting even. Director Nicholas Gesner and Bronson had an argument, and Bronson was quite critical of Gesner, going so far as to joke about his violent off-screen behavior. During an appearance on a television show, his wife, Jill Ireland, made fun of his explosive anger. The fact that Bronson had disagreements with directors was no secret. He blamed their inanity and frequently found them difficult to collaborate with. His fiery temper was legendary on set, and numerous directors had entertaining anecdotes about working with the actor. For instance, Telephone director Don Siegel recounted a humorous incident with actress Lee Remick, who was terrified that Bronson would bite her if she touched his face during a scene. Bronson and his wife, Jill Ireland, portrayed a grizzled fighter in Hard Times, a film by Walter Hill set during the Great Depression. Hill thought Bronson was in great shape for his age, but he was short on stamina due to his smoking. The fact that Hill and Bronson were able to resolve their differences over the editing of Ireland's segments demonstrates Bronson's erratic behavior. Director Sean Penn, who worked with Bronson on The Indian Runner, was also familiar with his strong preferences. Bronson was afraid his Italian followers would be let down if their favorite character died on film. When Bronson gave Billy Crystal the City Slickers script, the two had an intriguing encounter. In a reference to his renowned Death Wish series, Bronson called him up irate that his character was meant to die in the film, and to remind Crystal that Charles Bronson doesn't die in movies. By the way, have you heard about the issues surrounding Death Wish? After a tragedy befalls Paul Kersey's family, the ordinary architect becomes a vigilante. Director Michael Winner believed Bronson was the ideal choice for the part. Bronson appeared tailor-made for the role, what with his commanding presence. The film's $22 million in earnings much outweighed its $3.7 million production budget when it opened on July 24, 1974. Having said that, the film has its detractors. Henry Fonda found the plot disgusting and Frank Sinatra declined the part. But Bronson allegedly said, "I'd like to do it," indicating his eagerness to take on the role. Classic Bronson reaction: "No, I want to shoot muggers," in response to Winner's question about whether he meant the movie. Paul Kohner, Bronson's agent, spoke to him about the risks of the film's theme library. He brought up the possibility that the plot could promote the idea of self-governance. As evidence for his claim, Bronson cited the adage, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind," to explain how the film dealt with the negative outcomes of vengeance. Notably, Brian Garfield was not thrilled with Bronson's decision to adapt his 1972 novel Death Wish for the big screen. Garfield assumed Bronson would open fire the moment he was cast in the part. Garfield had originally envisioned Sidney Lumet directing the picture and Jack Lemmon playing the major role. What would Jack Lemmon look like in a vigilante role? Michael Winner, the film's director, had other thoughts and should have been nicer to Garfield's book. Michael Winner, director of Death Wish, made some nasty comments that irritated Brian Garfield, the author of the novel. According to Garfield, Winner may have sold no more than 3 books, and his mom must have purchased all 3. "Come on, were you thinking you were writing a fairy tale?" he said to Garfield in an abrupt manner. A guy goes around murdering people in this story. Despite its brutality, Death Wish was a smashing success, and it spawned a string of sequels. Paul Kersey was played by Charles Bronson in the first Death Wish film and in all 5 of its subsequent installments. Back in 1974, 1982, 1985, 1987, and 1994. Evidently, though, Garfield was not a fan of sequels as they served mostly to showcase Bronson's acting abilities. This was not, according to Garfield, an outstanding performance. Despite the conclusion of the Death Wish flicks, they caused quite a stir regarding graphic violence in cinemas and other related topics. Bernhard Gutz, who became famous as the subway vigilante after apprehending 4 unarmed black men in the 1984 New York City subway, is one such incident. Michael Winner made an embarrassing joke when questioned about the incident, stating, "I don't approve of what Mr. Getz did, but hey, if he's got to shoot someone on the subway, why not when we're opening?" Probably not the most delicate remark. When Donald Trump brought up the subject of a death desire at a rally in 2015, things took a bizarre turn. Having a concealed carry permit, he threatened to use it in the event of an attack. Trump went so far as to say that they couldn't perform Death Wish today due to concerns about political correctness, and the audience reacted by shouting Bronson's name. The movie's legacy had gone off the rails and into uncharted terrain. When Bronson released Death Wish via The Face of Death in 1994, it was his last film in the series in which he played the vigilante. His acting career was far from over, though. He continued to play the silent, powerful type in a string of television movies called Family of Cops. Men of substance whose deeds convey more meaning than words. For Bronson, this was more than simply a part. It reflected his character in real life. Bronson wasn't the kind to waste time chit-chatting as his impact in the industry grew. Even watching his own movie was too much for him. Despite his notoriety, he was content to allow his work speak for itself. However, there is a catch. His beloved wife Jill Ireland's memoirs were turned into a film in 1990 after she died of cancer. Ireland was played by Jill Clayburgh and Bronson by Lance Henriksen. Bronson was enraged by your tribute despite your expectations that he would enjoy it. There was a time when he thought about suing the movie makers. It seems that Bronson's gruff on-screen image extended into his off-screen life as well. Even though most of the things Charles Bronson told about his travels were greatly fabricated, he enjoyed bragging about his alleged past in life. People who knew Bronson well say he was not nearly as violent as he appeared in his black and white films, and he certainly never spent time behind bars. Someone would assume he attempted to embellish the story in order to make himself appear more impressive. Another peculiarity of Bronson's behavior was his refusal to shake hands, even though some thought he was too proud to do so. Calla had always avoided situations where she could be exposed to germs and contagion since she was a proven germ-phobe. His dread of being sick was the real reason behind this tendency, which may have been seen as arrogance. Readers also discovered that Bronson's fear of fire was unjustified. To ensure that he and his crew could escape the set in the case of a fire, Nichols insisted on staying in motels with no more than 2 stories while filming Death Wish in 1974. Despite his rugged good looks and muscular build, Bronson was really quite the gentleman. He was more comfortable talking about his painting and sculpture than his acting career or interviews. He painted under the pseudonym Binsky so that his work would remain distinct from his celebrity. His work was successful in selling itself. In a touching tale, Bronson stars alongside a youthful Kurt Russell. A remote-controlled airplane was a surprise present for Bronson from 12-year-old Russell when he found out it was his birthday. When Russell asked Bronson for a skateboard for his birthday a few months later, he received a high-end model. Despite his distant attitude at first, Bronson defended Russell when a security guard attempted to confiscate it from him on the studio lot, and compelling them to skateboard around the parking lot together. Many people failed to notice the amiable side of Bronson until they witnessed this act of generosity. Charles Bronson was a man of profound emotion, and great suffering among his many tragedies was the death of his second wife, Jill Ireland. A younger actress named Kim Michelle Weeks was there for him from the time of his loss to the end, and they fell in love again. The loss of his second wife, Jill Ireland, was only one of many hardships that Charles Bronson endured throughout his life. Nonetheless, he shifted his affections to a younger actress named Kim Michelle Weeks, and they remained together until his death. Due to health issues, including the onset of heart disease and his recovery from hip replacement surgery, Bronson decided to retire from acting at a young age. Bronson died on August 30, 2003 at the age of 81, after a long battle with pneumonia and Alzheimer's disease in his last years. Katrina Holden Bronson, Tony Zuleika, and Suzanne were among Bronson's many children. But it didn't take long for Katrina to realize that her parents had adopted her. But as a film director, she has achieved success nevertheless. Bronson amassed a fortune that would be worth $75 million today thanks to his astute business acumen. He was the owner of several items, including farms and homes. Among the items he owned and talked about was the artwork from Scoop Town, a piece he treasured deeply. Charles Bronson's life demonstrates that even the hardest people experience weak spots and intense feelings from time to time. His story demonstrates that beyond seemingly insurmountable barriers, people are really quite kind and loving.